Hello everyone, and welcome to my B&B CBS Gossip 24 channel. Finn was pacing the living room of the B&B shop, his jitters rasping as the events of the autumn replayed in his mind, and he could hardly believe what he'd just witnessed. Sheila Faines, the woman who had always floated on the edges of chaos in his life, had just dropped a stunner that left everyone reeling, and he was caught exactly in the middle of it, his heart pounding so hard he stressed it might vault out of his casket. It all began innocently enough, with Sheila showing up suddenly, her eyes flashing with that unsettling admixture of mischief and disclosure that made people both cautious and charmed, and she had a way of walking into a room and incontinently commanding attention, her presence insolvable to ignore, and Finn knew this was going to be one of those moments that would change everything. The discussion had started casually, with small talk that sounded nearly trivial, but Finn noticed a certain pressure in Sheila's voice, a deliberate meter in her words that suggested she was erecting up to commodity monumental, and as she spoke, she sluggishly, designedly revealed details about recent events in the lives of the people at the B&B that nothing had anticipated she knew, leaving everyone around her on edge and brooding under their breath about what could conceivably be coming next. Also came the moment that transferred Finn's world spinning, the disclosure about a child. Sheila, with a sly smile that masked just enough vulnerability to keep people guessing, blazoned that there was a shocking verity about a baby, one that no bone had suspected, and the room went silent as everyone reused her words, each person imagining the insolvable scripts that could explain her cryptic protestation. Finn, unfit to contain his shock, felt his knees weaken, realizing that the counter-accusations of her advertisement could ripple through every corner of his life, not only stirring up old recollections and undetermined conflicts but also hanging connections that had sounded stable, and just as he opened his mouth to demand explanation, Sheila leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tale that carried a weight no bone could ignore, and she spelled out that the child in question might not be who everyone allowed it was, egging Cleric, who had been standing still hard, to indurate, his usual countenance shattered, his jaw slack in unbelief, as the suggestion that Sheila might be carrying his baby hung in the air like a thick, suffocating fog. Finn's mind contended with questions, each one further critical and intimidating than the last. How could this be possible? What did this mean for Deacon, for the child, for the involved web of commitment and backstabbings that had come their lives at the B&B? Sheila's eyes sparkled with a dangerous admixture of delight and cunning as she watched the responses unfold, easily delighting the chaos she had unleashed, and she began to relate subtle hints and relations that only she could have witnessed, precisely casting a narrative that contemporaneously provoked fear, curiosity, and unbelief, leaving Finn and everyone differently scrabbling to erect together the verity from her tantalizingly deficient story. Cleric, generally so stoic and confident, looked hugely speechless, caught between unbelief and the eating dubitation that Sheila's claim might hold some verity, and the air in the room sounded to cake with pressure as each person tried to reuse the emotional magnitude of what Sheila had just revealed, while Finn, his studies a whirlwind of fear and defensive instincts, considered the consequences if her disclosure were accurate, knowing that everything, connections, trust, futures, hung in a delicate balance that could shatter with a single misstep. Sheila, seeing their fermentation, allowed a moment of silence to stretch, letting the shock settle into their minds before delivering the capper, a statement that suggested she had substantiation, or at least intimate knowledge, that could confirm the child's lineage, and the weight of her words pressed down on the group, leaving Finn pulsing slightly, his hands gripped, his mind replaying every hassle, every transitory regard, every suspicious moment, searching for an indication he might have missed, while Deacon, still firmed, felt a strange vulnerability creep into his casket, the kind that comes when life's certainties are suddenly stripped down, leaving only questions and fear. The B&B, generally a sanctuary of familiarity and comfort, now felt like a stage for battle, each creaking floorboard and soft howl of wind outside the windows amplifying the pressure, as Finn and Deacon changed aesthetics filled with implied solicitude, realizing that the ramifications of Sheila's exposure could review their places, Gemütlichkeit, and alliances, and that the riddle of the child's identity could end only change the particular lives of those involved but could also come a catalyst for drama that muscle ripple through the broader community, leaving connection strained and commitment tested in ways none of them had anticipated. Sheila, undeterred by their responses, continued her measured, deliberate performance, dropping subtle hints about relations and private exchanges she had observed, each disclosure precisely designed to provoke dubitation and stir emotion, and Finn could feel his palpitation quicken as he plotted to maintain countenance, his mind oscillating between wrathfulness, fear, and the hopeless need to cover those he watched about from the implicit fallout, while Deacon's usual bravado gave way to query, a rare and agitating state for him, as he absorbed the possibility that he might indeed be more privately connected to the riddle than he ever imagined, and the room sounded to shrink under the weight of Sheila's words, enmeshing everyone in a moment suspended between unbelief and the need for answers. Each person present grappled with their own emotional response, some rumbling conjectures to each other, others gaping blankly at Sheila, staying for the coming disclosure, as if time itself had braked to allow the full impact of her exposure to sink by, and Finn, torn between defying Sheila, guarding Cleric, and uncovering the verity, felt a nearly paralyzing pressure that left him both mentally exhausted and hyperactive alert. Surveying every nuance of Sheila's expressions for suggestions, trying to determine if she was pretending, manipulating, or revealing a verity too long hidden. Sheila, masterful in her control of the narrative, allowed the suspension to make to a top, before dropping another precisely chosen expression, one that inferred the actuality of a secret that could irrevocably alter their comprehensions of fidelity, love, and responsibility, and the B&B, generally a background for friendly badinage and calm exchanges, now felt like a courtroom, a stage, and a battleground each of formerly, where each word carried implicit consequences that could reshape lives ever. Finn's study swirled, a admixture of once regrets, fears for the present, and anxieties for the future, as he tried to erect together how this disclosure might affect not just Cleric and Sheila, but also the network of musketeers, family, and associates who had unwittingly come entangled in this web of suspension, treason, and disclosure, while Deacon, still scuffling with shock, began to question every commerce he'd had with Sheila in recent weeks, wondering which moments had been innocent and which had been calculated, and Finn, knowing the significance of timing and response, tried to undergird his own responses, apprehensive that any misstep could escalate the situation beyond form. Sheila, with her usual faculty for drama, also suggested at exchanges and encounters that no bone differently had been privy to, suggesting knowledge of intimate details and secrets that only someone deeply bedded in their lives could know, causing whispers to ripple through the room as each person considered the possibility that the child's lineage might indeed be tied to Deacon, and the consummation that Sheila had orchestrated this disclosure with perfection left Finn both impressed and affrighted, marveling at her cunning while bracing for the emotional fallout. The pressure, nearly palpable, sounded to palpitate with every twinkle in the room, as Finn and Deacon changed a look that conveyed collective recognition of the stakes, a silent agreement that the verity, whatever it was, demanded to be uncovered before it caused irrecoverable damage, while Sheila, satisfied with the impact of her advertisement, leaned back slightly, her expression a blend of triumph and recreation, easily enjoying the spectacle she had created, yet leaving just enough nebulosity to ensure that the questions would loiter, suspending them all in a state of anxious expectation, with the air thick with implied fears, hopeless curiosity, and the heavy weight of implicit consequences that none of them could ignore. As the autumn murk dragged across the B&B shop, Finn felt the room ending in with the graveness of Sheila's disclosure, knowing that every step forward would bear careful navigation through falsehoods, half-trueness, and emotional minefields, while Deacon, still reeling, plotted to attune the possibility that his life might be irrevocably altered by the actuality of this child, and the subtle recrimination that Sheila might have orchestrated this entire moment as a means to control, manipulate, or simply reveal long-retired trueness left a bitter taste in Finn's mouth, mingled with the adrenaline of urgency and the need for action. Sheila, ever the mastermind of drama, allowed her final words to loiter, teasing just enough detail to enkindle a storm of enterprise, wrathfulness, and unbelief, icing that Finn, Deacon, and everyone additional present would spend the coming days and nights unraveling the verity, defying their passions, and scuffling with the inarguable reality that the disclosure of a child's lineage, especially one tied to Deacon, was a seismic event that could reshape their lives, challenge their trust, and test the very bonds they allowed were unbreakable. And as the room sluggishly filled with murmurs, questions, and the uneasy hell of movement, Finn realized with a sinking heart that nothing would ever be the same again, that Sheila had, with a single statement, fitted herself into the most intimate corners of their lives, and that the suspension girding whose child it truly was, and whether Deacon was indeed the father, would dominate their every study, action, and discussion, leaving a moping pressure that promised drama, conflict, and disclosure in equal measure. And as the day faded into evening, Finn could only brace himself for the storm of feelings, secrets, and consequences that Sheila's shocking concession had unleashed, knowing that the B&B shop, once a place of routine and fellowship, had come the center of a disclosure whose ripples would extend far beyond its walls, changing connections, lives, and the future ever. Finn was pacing the living room of the B&B shop, each step scraping lightly against the worn wooden floorboards, his jitters rasping like dry leaves in an autumn wind as the events of the past hours, days, and even months replayed relentlessly in his mind, forming a looping montage that he could neither stop nor comprehend. He could hardly believe what he had just witnessed, what Sheila Faines had just revealed, a disclosure so stunning and destabilizing that it left everyone present reeling in a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and awe, and Finn, of course, was caught exactly in the middle of it, his heart pounding so violently against his ribcage that he half feared it might vault out of his chest entirely, like some overzealous bird desperate for freedom. It all began innocently enough, with Sheila arriving without warning, her sudden appearance slicing through the monotony of the afternoon like a knife through fog. She entered the room with that characteristic mixture of mischief and revelation in her gaze, a gaze that seemed always to promise both charm and peril, coaxing people to lean in even as their instincts whispered caution. There was a particular cadence to her step, deliberate yet light, as if she were choreographing her entrance to ensure that all eyes found her, and in that moment, Finn knew with an unsettling certainty that this was not a visit that would pass quietly, that it would be one of those moments, rare, devastating, unforgettable, that could alter everything in its wake. The conversation began almost innocuously, with casual banter that on the surface sounded nearly trivial, remarks about the weather, fleeting observations about the state of the garden outside, even the slight hum of domesticity one might expect in a place like this. But Finn, attuned as he always was to nuance, immediately noted the pressure behind her words, the deliberate meter, the barely perceptible rhythm that suggested she was building to something monumental, a truth carefully framed, a revelation she had chosen to unveil at precisely the right instant. She spoke sluggishly, almost toying with the cadence of her own voice, revealing details about the recent happenings at the B&B that no one could have anticipated. She knew, leaving the assembled group on edge, murmuring softly under their breath, each person imagining what could possibly follow such cryptic disclosures. And then, there came the moment that sent Finn's world spinning, the pivot around which all other concerns now revolved, the disclosure about a child. Sheila, ever the maestro of misdirection, allowed a sly smile to dance across her face, one that masked vulnerability but not so thoroughly that anyone could ignore the sharp glint of cunning in her eyes. Then, in words that seemed both deliberate and devastatingly casual, she blazoned the truth, or at least the fragment of truth she had chosen to disclose, about a baby. One that no one present had suspected, a verity that made the room halt in unison, as if even time itself had paused to process the magnitude of the claim. Finn's knees buckled almost imperceptibly as he realized the ramifications. This was not a simple secret, it was a seismic disruption of the established order. Every connection, every assumption about loyalty, commitment, and identity within the cozy walls of the B&B now hung precariously, trembling in the weight of Sheila's revelation. He opened his mouth to demand clarification, to demand the truth, but before he could articulate even a single word, Sheila leaned in, her presence immediately intensifying, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial tone that carried an undeniable weight. Her words, carefully enunciated, suggested that the child in question might not be who everyone assumed, dropping the implication like a stone in a pond, where the ripples of disbelief and dread spread with dizzying speed. Cleric, who had been standing motionless, as if rooted to the spot by habit and discipline, suddenly seemed to stiffen in a way that betrayed the shock beneath his normally unshakable exterior. His jaw slackened, his usual countenance of stoic detachment utterly shattered, and Finn could not help but notice how the suggestion, that Sheila might be carrying his baby, hung in the air like an oppressive fog, thick and suffocating, wrapping itself around each person in the room. Finn's mind raced violently, each thought more critical and intimidating than the last. How could this be possible? What did this mean for Deacon, for the child, for the web of commitments, alliances, and betrayals that had quietly woven through their lives at the B&B over the years? Sheila's eyes, sharp and sparkling with a dangerous mixture of delight and cunning, swept across the room, observing reactions with a precision that was almost surgical. She savored the chaos she had unleashed, the careful unraveling of composure, the tremors of fear and disbelief that radiated outward from each person she had ensnared. Her performance was deliberate, every gesture, every inflection, every pause had been meticulously calculated to provoke the exact mix of fear, curiosity, and incredulity she desired. Subtle hints were sprinkled through her account, references to interactions and knowledge that only she could have accessed, crafting a narrative that provoked the entire room into a state of anxious, almost frantic speculation. Even Cleric, whose usual poise and competence seemed impervious to perturbation, appeared speechless, suspended in disbelief and gnawing doubt, caught between outright rejection of the notion and the reluctant admission that perhaps Sheila's claim might hold some measure of truth. The air itself seemed to thicken with the emotional magnitude of her disclosure, as though the walls of the B&B had drawn inward to concentrate the intensity of their collective astonishment. Finn, his mind a whirlwind of fear, defensive instincts, and analytical impulses, considered the consequences if her words were accurate. Connections thought solid could fracture, trust, once implicit, could become fragile, futures meticulously imagined could crumble in an instant. Sheila, recognizing the ferment she had induced, allowed the silence to stretch, permitting the weight of the revelation to settle into the minds of her audience. And then, in the manner of a masterful dramatist, she delivered what could only be described as the capper, an assertion that she possessed either proof or intimate knowledge that could confirm the child's lineage, a statement that compressed gravity into mere syllables yet pressed down with immense force. Finn's pulse quickened, he gripped his hands to control the tremor threatening to betray him, replaying every prior interaction, every fleeting glance, every minor disagreement that might have hinted at truths now fully revealed. Deacon, though attempting to remain composed, felt a creeping vulnerability, the rare sensation of life's certainties being stripped away, leaving nothing but unstable questions and gnawing fear. The B&B, typically a sanctuary of routine, warmth, and minor domestic dramas, had become something far more treacherous, a stage upon which personal revelations collided with old alliances and hidden resentments. Each creaking floorboard, each sigh of wind against the windows, amplified the tension that Sheila's words had introduced. Finn and Deacon exchanged glances, realizing the stakes of Sheila's disclosure extended beyond mere interpersonal shock. It threatened the very architecture of trust and stability that underpinned their world, and the potential repercussions could ripple far beyond the immediate circle, through friends, family, and community alike. Sheila continued, undeterred by the responses, some aghast, others suspicious, all tense, methodically dropping hints of observed interactions, minor but telling details, weaving a tapestry that only someone intimately entangled in their lives could fabricate. Finn felt his heartbeat accelerate with each clue, oscillating between rage, fear, and the urgent need to shield those around him from the fallout she had orchestrated. Deacon's usual bravado faltered, the possibility that he was personally implicated forced a rare and disorienting vulnerability, a state that gnawed at him from within. The room seemed to shrink under Sheila's words, the walls contracting as if conspiring with her to enclose the group within a pressure chamber of suspense and anxiety. Each person present wrestled with their emotions in private ways, some whispered conjectures, trying to make sense of the revelation, others stared at Sheila as if she were both a magician and a threat, waiting for the next act in her carefully staged drama. Finn, torn between defying Sheila, guarding Cleric, and uncovering the truth, felt an almost paralyzing weight press upon him, a duality of exhaustion and hyper-alertness that left him scanning each micro-expression, each hesitant movement, trying to discern authenticity from manipulation. Sheila, master of timing and suspense, allowed the tension to crest, then released a subtle flourish, a statement suggesting the reality of a secret that could irrevocably reshape understandings of fidelity, love, and responsibility. The B&B, once a backdrop for light-hearted conversation and quiet reprieve, now resembled a courtroom, a battlefield, a theater of existential consequence, where every word uttered carried implications capable of altering the course of lives. Finn's mind reeled, swirling with regret for past actions, fear for the present, and anxiety for a future now so precariously suspended. He attempted to synthesize the potential impact of Sheila's disclosure, not just on Cleric and Sheila, but across the broader network of friends, colleagues, and family who had